The burning question of the day when we got into town. Can anybody tell me, will the borough beat the clown? The bets were on, the match began, excitement gripped us all, and the earth beneath us trembled when the ref threw in the ball. So let us sing, now all together, fill your glasses up with porter, gin and wine. Oh, let it be fine or stormy weather, up the borough every time.
Good evening, everybody. It's Thursday, the 13th of July 2023, and we're assembled here at the Annamoy Bridge at the bottom of the village of Moyvane to do a walkabout of the village. We'll go from the Annamoy Bridge up through the village as far as the forge on the Ockram side, the Tarbert side of the village, and we'll go through all the history of the place, the churches, the post office, the schools, the garden barracks, you name it, the shopkeepers, the farmers, all the people who lived in Myvan in my time. I can remember, I'm 70 years of age now, so I can remember a good 65 years. There will be people on the tour who will know more, and I would love if they would contribute, interrupt me at any time they want and add what they have to say. So we'll start now, okay? We're assembled here at the Annamoy Bridge. Some people call it the Owenamoy, O-W-E-N-A-M-O-Y. Some people call it the Annamoy, A-N-N-A-M-O-Y. I prefer the Annamoy because it's closer to Anna Livia Purabell, which is James Joyce's famous river in Dublin, the Livy. It means the river of the plain. As you know, Myvan is on Myvan, the central plain, and central to what we don't know because the geography would have been different. Not the geography, but the areas would have been different to time, going back hundreds of years. For instance, if Myvan is in Myvan, why is Mutter Ma-Itter, the eastern plain, because it's actually west of Myvan? But that's linguistics, that's not geography. Myvan is part of the parish of Myvan and Knockanure. It consists of two civil parishes. Mutter is a civil parish where we are here, and Knockanure is a civil parish in Knockanure. Basically, the school in Myvan is still called Mutter National School. Myvan as a village was known for many years as Newtown Sands. They were the Cromwellian planters, and they weren't all bad people. The last of them were pretty bad, alright. George Sands was known for rack renting and all the rest of it, and so much so that in 1886, in the centre of the village, a meeting was called, and at the meeting were two MPs, John Dillon, father of the great James Dillon, Timothy Harrington, and there was a few more people as well there, but the two MPs were there, and they decided that they would make the landlords treat the people fairly. They were part of the Land League movement at the time, and the landlords, some of the landlords, not all of them, some of the landlords were rack renting, and they were absentee landlords and all the rest. So the people were so impressed by John Dillon that they decided in 1886 to rename the village from Newtown Sands to Newtown Dillon. And that lasted for a while, but old habits die hard, and it reverted to Newtown Sands again. Then in 1916 we had the Easter Rebellion, and there was a doctor, a medical doctor in the village called Wolfe, and he wanted the village to be called after Thomas Clark, one of the signatories of the Proclamation of Independence, who was executed for his part in the Rising in 1916, and Newtown Clark was the name of the place for a while, and again that didn't work. And in 1939, our parish priest, the famous Father Danny O'Sullivan, who built also the church here in Myvan, he decided that we'd call the parish after the townland on which the village is built. The village is built in Myvan North, the townland of Myvan North, and people were calling it Myvan. So since 1939, that was when the change was made. It took a long time for the official change to be made, and as a matter of fact there still is one district electoral area in the parish called Newtown Sands. That has nothing to do with the official name Myvan of the parish, but some people vote in the district electoral area of Myvan. And in December 2000, a plebiscite was held in Myvan for the people to decide whether they would change that one area from Newtown Sands to Myvan. And 473 votes were cast. 66 wanted it to be retained as Newtown Sands, and 407 wanted to be changed to Myvan. But that wasn't enough. They had to have half the total electorate plus one, and 473 votes, or 407 votes, was not half the total electorate plus one, so it still is Newtown Sands. But I don't mind that, because I taught in the village here from 1975 until 2007, and the people from the outlying places, the outlying townlands coming into the school, the youngsters would say they were going to Newtown, which is fine. History is history, amnesia is never good, and we have a lot to be proud of in the name Newtown Sands. The great Con Brosnan, for instance, there are songs about him as Kerry's idol from Newtown Sands. A great Republican, a great soldier, a great Free Stater, a great footballer who won 6 All-Ireland medals with that great Kerry team, which in the 20s and 30s won the first 4 in a row ever. But anyway, here is the monumental stone to Thomas Moore. Who was Thomas Moore? Thomas Moore was the son of John Moore, who was born over there in your place, I'd say, isn't it? Yeah, just over there, a few hundred yards over there. And his father was John Moore. And John Moore was from, as Father Tony God describes, the Onomai Bridge, or near the Onomai Bridge. He went to school walking all the way to Knockanure, if you know where Treen is, where Horgan's garage is. Up there, there's a field still known as John Lynn's Field. Why John Lynn's Field? John Lynn was the head schoolmaster who ran his head school at that field, and John Moore went all the way from the Onomai Bridge up to Treen to John Lynn to be educated, where he got a pretty good education. Those head schoolmasters, a lot of them had classical education, and they taught the classics and they taught mathematics among other subjects. So Moore would have had a good education, and he went to Tralee to work as a kind of a shopkeeper for somebody, and then he moved from Tralee and he moved to Dublin, and his son Thomas was born in Angel Street in 1779. Thomas Moore was known as the national poet of Ireland. He was very popular for a long time. His songs, and his songs especially, Moore's melodies, were sung by, even up to my time in the 1950s and 60s, by the great John McCormack and Michael O'Duffy and all those people. Songs like The Heart That Once Through Tara's Halls, songs like The Meeting of the Waters, songs like Should Aidan Remember the Days of Old, all this kind of stuff. And he was very popular. He was a great piano player, and he was a great singer, so he was well able to market his songs. Now, where did he get his airs from? He didn't make up the original airs. The airs to Moore's melodies are not original. There was a Harper's Festival in Belfast sometime before Moore's time, and they had collected, the people who could write music had collected the airs of the ancient harpers, and Moore adapted those airs to his songs. He went to England then. He was a friend of Robert Emmet, but he was cute enough not to get involved in the rebellion, so his skin was saved, and he went to England, where he went to Wiltshire, and he was very friendly with the Lansdownes in Wiltshire. The Lansdownes are my people, the Fitzmaurices, and one of them, actually, they would have owned originally the Castle in the Stole, for instance, all that kind of stuff. And Charlie Lansdowne, the Marquis of Lansdowne, and his wife came over when they opened again officially Listowel Castle to the public. Partly you were there that evening yourself. And Moore loved to be hobnobbing with the nobility. And a lot of people claiming to be relations of his used to call to Wiltshire to meet Moore, and he would have nothing to do with them. Probably he thought they were looking for money or something like that, I don't know. But he's very famous in England as well, because his poetry was hugely popular in his time. And he's now gone into decline. He's seen as unfashionable. But as late as 20 or 30 years ago, the great Ulster Unionist poet James Symonds wrote a poem to Thomas Moore saying that they would sing unembarrassed his marvellous songs. So Moore would cross, you know, the Unionist and Republican divide quite easily, and he died in 1852. And I think all his children died before he died himself. So that's Thomas Moore, and the field we're here, what used to be, it was Slate's Field when I was growing up. Why was it called Slate's Field? Because it was the O'Connors, and the O'Connors had a slate house. And that's why they were, Connie Slate was the man that I remember, the last of the slates I remember. It's now your place. And it was a daffodil field some 20 or 30 years ago, you remember. A company took it over and sowed it completely with daffodils. It was a sight to behold. And then when the contract was over, everybody was picking daffodils, by the way, and selling them and commercially and everything. And when the contract was over, they ploughed up the field to bring it back to agricultural land again, but the daffodils kept growing. So they had to spray the daffodils, and you can now see it is perfect agricultural land. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to walk up to what we used to call the new houses, which is now Woodgrove, and we'll stop there at, we say, doors or whatever, and so will we proceed? By the way, as I said, in case some of you are late coming, if anybody wants to come in at any stage with any piece of information, any story, any bit of a song or poem, please feel welcome to do so. Because oh yeah, that's Stack's Field. Oh, there was, yeah. That was a sports field also before Brosnan's Field became a sports field, and when we were going down to Mossy Carney's, my cousin, my mother and my father and myself, we used to walk down this way on the bank of the river, and that was known as the 21-acre field. It was the biggest field in the parish because the EU hadn't made all the farmers plough in their fields, so all the fields were small. But that was a 21-acre field. Stacks, Con Brosnan would have played there. Some of the great North Kerry Myvan footballers would have played there. And interesting enough, when there was no parish rule, Con was able to get very good footballers to play with Myvan. He got Croc-Darring Jack, the great Jack Welch, to play with Myvan. He got Eddie Welch from Knocknagoshel to play with Myvan. So we have the most North Kerry championships still on record, partly because of that.
Do you know the priest was here recently?
Yeah?
His uncle used to come with Eddie Welch to play with Clonbrasna here in Myvan.
Really?
Luke Murphy.
Luke Murphy. Oh yes.
He used to come here.
Yeah.
There was cycle from North Africa.
Oh yes, as long as, yeah. Right, we'll move on. We're now at Mulville's house. John Mulville lives there now, and his father Willie and his wife, who was a door woman, one of the doors just up there, they lived there for years. They were known as the Waver Mulvilles, or the Wavers, because they were weavers. The trade of weaving was in the parish at one stage, about 100 years ago. And they're also a very musical family. They're connected to the other Wavers in Ballygauchlan. These Wavers came from Glenalapa, and the other Wavers, their first cousins, came from Ballygauchlan and Glyn. One of those was the great Martin Mulville, who got the National Award in America many years ago for his contribution to the arts in America. He was a great composer of tunes. He was a great fiddle player. His son, Brendan, has retired now from America to live in the ancestral home in Ballygauchlan, an All-Ireland champion fiddle player. You would know the Margie Mulville and those others. They're all the same Mulvilles. So that's Mulville's, and I suppose you could say it is the last house in the village. So we'll proceed up now to the new houses. in that gate there and those houses, that land belongs to Stacks. Stevie Stack would be my contemporary, slightly older than me. His son William runs it now. His father William Stack, Billion Stack as he was called, that would have been Stevie Stack's father, ran it. The Stacks originally came from Dewar and they acquired the land. It was owned by a Protestant family called the Smiths, who was supposed to have been the last Protestant family in Moyvane. And they left during the Troubles in the 1920s, you know, the big trouble from 1919 to 1923. So they sold up and the Stacks bought it. And one of the sons, the grandsons of the man who bought it, Stevie's brother, Stevie himself is a great sportsman. He's a couple of North Kerry Championship medals. But the most famous one is Tommy Stack, the great jockey, who, as you know, rode Red Rum to victory in the Grand National. And he's also a famous horse trainer now. And he comes not very much to Myvan anymore. But I remember the night that we had for Tommy Stack when he won, the first time he won on Red Rum. There was a big night in Brossen's Bar, and the whole parish turned up to pay homage to an internationally famous sportsman, because when you win the Grand National you're up there at the very top of the very best. So that's where the sash came from. And I remember as a young lad in the 1950s, Thomas would have gone to school here locally, but he didn't go to St. Michael's in Listowel. He went to the I think they were Jesuits in Mungret. Would that be right, Father? To the Jesuits in Mungret. And when he came home, they had little jumps, horse jumps, fences ready for Tom. Even as a youngster, he was jumping horses. So he was afterwards a famous jump jockey. Now, if we turn the cameras this way, there were two houses here. One of them was belonging to the Kelleher's and the other to the McCabe's. Now, I'm not quite sure, it's a long time, but one of them, in one of those houses now lives the ex-Labour County Councillor, Pat Leahy. Pat was a Labour County Councillor for a number of elections and served the parish very well. And in the next house, the other house, were the McCabe's. I remember two of them, Johnny McCabe and Mikey McCabe. One of them was a good footballer, because there's a line in a song from the 1920s that Paddy Enright would have written: Moss Welsh gets the ball and he uses it well. He patched the McCabe, but McCabe slipped and fell. But anyway, Johnny McCabe had a thought for the drink, and one night he came home and he fell into the fire, an open fire, and he was burnt to death. And his brother Mikey was a good man with the Sláin and a good man in the bog, and he dropped dead over in the bog many years later. So the Kelleher's and the McCabe's, and Timmy Noonan, of course, the good footballer, one of our best young hopes, who died tragically 2 years ago, lived in one of these houses, and as I say, Councillor Pat Leahy in the other. Okay? I just want to make a correction from the last piece there. Seamus has properly pointed out to me I made a mistake. It wasn't Mikey McCabe that dropped it over in the bog, it was Tommy the boss, Tom Enright. We'll explain that when we go up the Din Road about the Enrights, Tom and Lar. Well, anyway, we're here in what used to be called the new houses, what some people still call the new houses. They were built in the late 1950s, and it was the first housing estate that came into Myvan. A lot of people came in from Knockanure, Nashers and people like that, and other people from the village as well came in outside the village. There are three of the original families still living here. In the house behind us are the Doors. Just up from there are the O'Connells. Brendan O'Connell is there. And the third family are the Margaret Sweeney, Eamon Sweeney and Margaret Sweeney, down from Knockanure as well. So now it's now called Woodgrove. Father Neelius Enright, when he was here as a curate many years ago, he decided that the new houses was kind of a misnomer because they were no longer quite new. So he gave the people a choice of a number of names, and they voted for Woodview, so it's now called Woodview. Above Woodview is what I call Broke Gaila, because I like the Irish sound. Many people call it Broke Gale. It means the same thing, the banks of the River Gale. It's not in the banks of the River Gale exactly, which is 2 miles down there, but it's Broke Gaila, Broke Gale, and that's the newest housing estate we have here, and it's growing. These houses brought a kind of a new life to Myvan. You could say that up to 10 years ago, you would know everybody, their seed breeding generation in Myvan who walked the street. If you look out the street in Myvan now, you will see people you don't know. And it's great that there are people from here to come into the village and rejuvenate the place. After a number of years in the doldrums, the school has now 17 pupils coming in for low infants this year. And please God, you know, that will regenerate the place again. Because, you know, with pubs closing down and the post office closing down and the barrack closing down and the creamery being sold, we were at a low ebb for a while. But I think the tide has turned. The tide always turns anyway, and if we keep up with about the place, we'll never know. We might have another Broke Gaila or another Woodview again in the village. But anyway, we welcome all these new people into the village, by and large, and they get on with us, we get on with them. They keep to themselves a lot of the time, but that's fine too. So now we'll move on up to the end of the housing estate, okay? Right, when I was growing up in the village, I was born in 1952, born in the village. There was one garage where you could buy petrol and you could, no diesel that time, petrol, or you could get your car fixed. It was just up there. I'd come to it later on. It was owned by Conor Hogan, and Conor Hogan had a shop as well there. But we'll talk about that later on. This garage here, which is now closed, was owned by Jack Lynch. Now, Jack was from just below the Gale Bridge. I'm probably Guthrum with the area, but I'm not sure. But he was a great mechanic, and he could fix cars simply that it would take a computer to do nowadays. He was a genius at cars. And he worked first of all above in Shine's garage, in Conor Shine's garage. And then he came down and he opened the garage here, and Mike Dorr worked with him, and his two brothers, Con and Mike, worked with him. Now, as I'm talking about the doors, I should have mentioned below at the Woodgrove, at the new houses, that the first house there is Doors, and Jeremiah lives there now. His mother Sis and her husband Mike lived there. Mike died a young man. Mike was a powerfully strong man, but he was abused by his strength, because he used to lift the churns of milk into the creamery from the horse carts. There was no tractors or bulk tanks that time. He would lift those huge churns, pour the milk into the vat, and he strained his heart, and he died a young man. His father before that, who lived there as well in his later years, was a tailor. He was Mike Dorr. He was known as the Tailor Door. So they're the Doors. But anyway, Jack Lynch ran the garage there, and that was the first part of it there. And then he built an office on the right hand side, and then the bigger shed at the back. And he serviced lorries for Kerry Group at the time, Kerry Co-op. He had the contract, and he died a young man of a brain hemorrhage when he was driving his lorry or his van from, we'll say, Ahalana up to the village here, and died a young man. I believe that Owen McHenry has the place leased now or bought, is that right? So please God, I know that the Tyree Towns people have been criticised on occasions for the look of that place, but there's nothing they can do about it. But please God, when McHenry opens up business, it will be an attractive feature in the village again. Okay, now we won't walk another bit. Those two houses, that's Jack Lynch's house there, and above that is Joe Carney's house. He doesn't live there anymore. His father was Dan Carney, and his sister Maureen, ran the famous bar in the village, just like her father before her, and his father again before that, old Miles Carney. But there was a famous stalls there, a hay shed, and it was a famous place for courting couples. And the youngsters, when they got wind of the word that there was some action happening there, they would go down, and the local word we use is cruised. We would cruise them, throw stones or pebbles at them. So that was the famous Carney stalls. Okay. Now behind us here we have Mike Kennelly's Home Value, which is a very successful hardware store and keeps the village ticking over, because we need all the industry we have in the village and all the business, and thanks be to God that's one of the big ones here. We're very grateful to him and his family. It was built not as a hardware store and not built by Mike Kennelly. It was built by Betty Stack and her husband Sean Connor, wasn't it? As a supermarket. And they ran it for a while, and then they sold up and moved to Limerick, and Mike Kennelly bought it. We'll talk later on about where he started out up there at the corner, but when Mike built that, he turned it into a tremendously worthwhile project, and it has been bringing people into the village from all the neighbouring parishes. Now the stone there, you'll notice, is a grey coloured stone. That stone was Jimmy Stack from down there Mutter side was training to be a stonemason, and he's the man who cut the stone and hammered the stone for that. Now that was originally Leitrim stone. As you remember, Leitrim stone is a yellow goldy coloured stone, and then it was painted later on. Maybe the stone was getting discoloured or something, I don't know, but it was originally a Leitrim stone, unvarnished. So that's there. Across the way you have Shine. You notice provisions and groceries, CC Shine. Beside it is a house now. It's derelict now. It's not derelict, but it's not used now. That was the original garage in Myvan. That's where Jack Lynch worked. That's where Connie Shine worked. The son of CC Shine, he was old Con Shine, his son Con Shine, he was killed very tragically coming home from a wedding back in the 1960s. Was it? Right. Okay, then they had Con Shine sold bicycles as well, as we know, and the garage was down there. I stand corrected. Thanks, Noreen. So they had petrol there, and there's an iconic photograph taken by Jimmy Nolan from somewhere down there of the village going up, and you can see the signs for the petrol and all the rest. Now, next door to it was the shop. Con Shine and his son Connie Shine, who was married to Bridie Conroy, who originated from Dublin, would be a cousin of a distant cousin of the Shines, I think, in many ways. And they ran a very successful business there. Then Margaret, Connie's daughter and Bridie's daughter, took it over. Sheila was there, and they ran a very successful business there until they closed up some years ago. They also had a mill there. She was a district nurse, yeah, that's right, yeah, nurse Shine, yeah. She did, yeah. They had a mill there as well, and if you wanted to grind your corn or whatever, you went to the mill. There was also a mill in the creamery, but and that wound up as the place where all the grain was kept. As Noreen properly pointed out, Con's wife, old Con Shine's wife, was known as Nurse Shine. She was the district nurse, and before Bunty Carney she delivered half the parish. So that's the story there. Now we'll move on up to the gala. Yeah.
Mike actually started in there. He started his shop, Mike.
Right. Mike Kennelly started in there.
Yeah.
My God, before my time. He moved from there up. And then down. Right. Okay? By the way, when I said Betty Stack opened the shop down there with her husband Sean O'Connor, she was Betty Finucane, related to the Stacks, but she was Finucane herself, that's for the record. Here we are at Holly's Gala. That's the original Holly's Gala, we'll say, but before that, Johnny Holly and his wife, Pidge, she was Carney herself, a sister of Dan Carney, who owned the sheds down there, the stalls down there. They had a shop there, and a little grocery shop, and they lived on the premises as well. When I was growing up in Myvan, there were 14 grocery stores. Now the Hollies depended entirely on the grocery store. A lot of the people who had grocery shops in Myvan would have maybe a few acres of land or had a pub as well. So there was other income coming in. But a lot of them actually were depending on their income entirely from the grocery store. But if I'm correct, there was no income tax to be paid that time, so what you made you kept. So at least that was some way of doing it. There were three taxis in Myvan that time, hackney cars, they weren't called taxis that time. Johnny Holly had one, Johnny Culhan at the top of the village had another, and beyond that, just outside the village, was Jimmy Roach. Jimmy Roach was also a painter. So that was Holly's, and it was run by Johnny Holly, who came from Tarbert Parish, and his wife Pidge Carney, and then their daughter Emma ran it, and her husband Jack O'Brien, and now their son, who lives in the original house, Ivan O'Brien, has it leased to Gala, and it's run. And again, it's a great addition to the village because it does bring people into the village. It does generate interest in the village, and it keeps us on our toes. And it's a great place, a great store, and lots of people support it, and it's great to support our own industry. So we'll move. Oh, by the way, behind this is the playground, which was opened just a few years ago, and it's a tremendous asset to the village. As you can see, the children are playing there happily every day of the year, and a big crowd turned up. I was saying, you know, when we were growing up in the village, there was no playground. We played in the village. We played a game that I've never seen any place else. We used to call it Trinity, if you remember it, where half the boys and girls would line up on one side of the street, the other half on the other side of the street, and they'd run across, and if you were caught, you were on. So the last person to avoid capture was the winner, and we played that every evening in the village. I also remember, you know, nowadays children have their own Kerry jerseys and they have their own footballs. There was no football in the village when I was growing up. If you wanted to play football, you went down to the football field below Brosnan's field, as it was, and you went into Brosnan's pub, and they had a juvenile football and they had a senior football. And you got the juvenile football. That didn't matter if you were under 14 or under 16, you got the juvenile football and you went down and you played. We had no jerseys. The jerseys were kept at Brosnan's. So there was a juvenile set and there was a senior set, and that was it. But times have changed, and I suppose for the better. But we seem to have better footballers then than we have now. But they're coming again. I'm told that we're on the way back. Okay, we'll move on. Now the house is here. This one here is Dan Carney, known as Dan Carney at the Chapel. Why? Because there was Dan Carney at the shop just up the street. They were cousins, first cousins. Dan and his wife Bridie Buckley, they ran a big farm there, and they raised a fine family. Their son John took it over afterwards. He died a young man, and now their sons Ronan, and I think probably another one of the sons, maybe Miles, runs as well. And John's wife is still there, Mary. Next door is Bunty Carney's house, a sister of Dan Carney. Bunty was a local nurse as well, and a byword. She was a very lively, energetic, colourful woman. And Dan Keane wrote a poem one time called The Hellbound Train, about all the people in the village. And when he came to Bunty, he gave the famous line to Patsy Horton out the road, which I'll talk about later on. Horton had a habit of saying deadly. Everything was deadly. A football match was deadly, or a dinner was deadly. And Dan Keane wrote the line, "Deadly says Horn as he scratched his head, I wouldn't like to tell you what Bunty said." Because what Bunty said was feckit, at a time when nobody would use that word. But anyway, Bunty lived there, she retired there, and she lived very happily there for many, many years. And it's now Ronan's house from the next door, and his wife. And next door would be Buckley's now, both owned by Buckley's, but the smaller house of the two was originally owned by a man called Connie Spark Nolan. I don't know very much about him, except that I heard my Uncle Billy talking about that not being Buckley's original property. It was Nolan's, and it was acquired by the Buckleys. Now, behind this here, we have the presbytery. Not the original presbytery. The original presbytery was slightly further up, and it was in a state of disrepair when Father Michael O'Leary decided to build a new presbytery which would accommodate 2 priests and have an office and all the rest. So how times have changed. But behind that we have the north wall of the old church. The old church was built in 1837-ish. You remember that Catholic religion was prescribed by the British, by the penal laws. And Daniel O'Connell, the great liberator from Carsavine, Car Daniel, got Catholic emancipation. We often think he got it for the Irish. He also got it for the Catholics in England. They were being prescribed as well. So he got Catholic emancipation. So that was 1829. Shortly after Catholic emancipation, the church was built here. And all that stands of it now is the north wall. And behind it there you can see the original bell of the old church. Now, the new church, which is the church dedicated to the BVM, the Blessed Virgin Mary, it was dedicated on August 25th, 1956. It was built by Father Dan O'Sullivan, who was a very, very famous man, still recounted in stories and tales, and many people felt that he built it as a monument to himself, because people felt that the old church was of a state that it could have been retained and could have been extended maybe or whatever, but it could have been it could have been retained. But anyway, we have our new church now, and I'm saying this with trepidation because there's a very famous book written by Tom Barrington called Discovering Kerry. And in it he describes the churches of Knockanure and Myvan. Knockanure comes off with a great bill of health, and I'm quoting Tom Barrington. He says, then you have the church in Myvan, designed by the architect from Cork, Boyd Barrett, of an ugliness indescribable, is how he describes it. I wouldn't agree with that. I'm sure you wouldn't, but that's in cold print for everybody to see all over the world. So that's Tom Barrington. But anyway, Father Brendan lives here now. Please God, for a long time. We're doing very well with him, and he's a great man, and we're delighted to have a mass in a church. Give him a clap of all of us. And yes, Seamus has just reminded me, below just about there was a famous orchard, beautiful apples. There was a wall in front of it, and the boys on the street, myself included, when there would be a holy hour on a Sunday night and the priest would be out of bounds for an hour, we would go in and we would rock the orchard. Steal the apples, in other words. I was checking out the origin of that word rock until I came across it back in West Kerry. It's egg rock oil, which means stealing apples, egg rock oil. So we rocked the orchard and got away with it. But there were several mentions of it the following Sunday at Mass about the blackguards in the town who couldn't behave themselves. But anyway, there we are. You'll just see in there the north wall. That's all that's standing of the old church. There. Yeah, it would be. Yeah. What's that?
The old presbytery.
Oh yeah, right here by the street, yeah. And beside it the old school. The first school, yeah. there. That's the church was.
But that's
Yeah. That's the north wall. Right. There the stones, yeah.
The origin, the old church.
Yeah. Now, here we are at the memorial wall of the three famous buildings. Behind you there is the church, 1837. That's the foundation stone of the church. No, that's the school, 1857. Is it 47 or 57? 57, yeah, 1857. Beside it is the church.
Which is wrong because Borough School, one of the first schools in Kerry.
It was.
Actually 1834. And is it the roll number is something like 352, which is a very early number. So that was actually wrong. One of the first schools in Kerry.
Right. So, but it could have been a later school.
Oh, it is a school.
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, in 1837, I have a little piece here about it, that there were 80 male students and 70 female students in 1857. There's a two-storey school. The boys were at the bottom and the girls were on top. That's the church. Father Long, he was the priest after Catholic emancipation. He was the parish priest, and he had that church built in 1837. And then up here, just next beyond the gate, is Moyvane National School, 1888. That's the one we would ought to have gone to. It was. We'll talk about it when we go up the Glen Road, but that was in 1888, and it was closed down in 1975. And opposite here is Buckley's, farmers, and Noreen Buckley is teaching in Knockanure now. She's the last of the Buckleys to live in the house. She's teaching in Knockanure as a primary teacher, and her father Ned ran the farm with his wife, and before that Buckley's field, which is where the soccer field, it's the creamery field now, the soccer field was played there. Soccer was played there about 10 years ago, Myvan Athletic. That was Buckley's field actually. So they own land a bit around the place. Next door to it you see Mike Kennelly's. Mike Kennelly, as he pointed out, started off below there, then he moved up here, and then he moved down to the place below. That was originally not Shine's but Richardson's. James Shine had it before. I'll explain it. It was originally Mrs. Richardson. She was a Shine herself, and she was related to the Sheehans and the Shines at the post office. They were all the one crowd, all big Fianna Fáil people. And Richardson owned a lot of property up the Din Road as well, and she was quite a prosperous woman. She was a widow woman, and when she died, she left the property to Jim Shine. And James Shine ran a very successful business there. Not just groceries and all the rest of it, but also other things up the Glen Road, like, you know, bags of meal and hardware and all the rest of it as well. So then Mike Kennelly took it over. Oh no, then it was taken over by Michael Hennessy. Michael Hennessy had a butcher shop there. He was married to Dolly Conroy, who would have been a sister of Bridie Shine down there. And they ran a very successful butcher business there. And below it for a while there was a hairdresser's, I remember. I can't remember who was hairdressing there, but the hairdressers was from there as well. And
And drapery.
there was a drapery, yeah. So now we go to the post office. At Shine's you had Father John Shine. At Buckley's you had two Holy Ghost fathers, Father Dennis, who spent a lot of time in Africa, and Father Michael. You had two Father Max, Father Miles Carney and Father Miles Carney. You had two priests, Father Eddie and Father Tom McElligott. You had two Cunningham priests, Father Jim and Father Pat Cunningham. Am I losing out anybody else? Certainly there was that many in the village anyway. Oh, a bit of Jimmy Collins, of course, the Glen Road man, yes, a bit about in Brazil, yeah, Jimmy Collins, and his brother Father Paddy Collins, Onestown, yeah. This is the site of the old post office. When I was growing up in the 50s, it was run by Kit Shine, a woman who never smiled. You had to be on your best manners with Kit Shine, and I can tell you, you wouldn't get much ray-hairing, as we'd say, from her. Ita O'Connor worked there as well, and they ran a great business there. Then it was taken over by Kit Shine's nephew, Dick Sheehan, and his wife, Bridie, and they ran the post office. And then it was taken over, Bridie retired, and it was taken over by the woman who closed the post office, basically. She had no choice. Mary, she really had no choice. It was, you know, the devil of the deep blue sea, you know, so she got a lot of stick, but it really wasn't her fault. Now, next door to it was, it's Sheehan's house now, but it was originally Shanahan's. And Con Shanahan lived there. Con died a few years ago. He went to England. He went to Croxley Green in London. The reason I'm saying it is many people won't remember the Shanahans, but his daughter Deirdre comes home quite a bit, and she's one of the top poets in England and novelists, Deirdre Shanahan. She's quite well known, and you know, used to call into Enright as well quite a bit.
His son has a house in
That's right, the home place, yeah. And as a matter of fact, while we're talking of writers in this neck of the woods, the famous Anne Enright, the novelist, one of the best novelists in the country, she's a relation of those Enrights. Did you know that?
I believe so.
She is, yeah. No, she claims it. Yeah. So there we are. Okay, next door to that,
There was our chemist shop. Yeah.
at one stage Nora McNally had it, and then she moved up. There was a chemist shop there run by Nora McNally, who later, a Dublin woman who later on married Noel Kennedy from Talbot. She ran the chemist shop there, and then she opened the chemist shop above where Speedy's is now. But we'll talk about that later on. Next door is Enright's pub. How many generations? Is it 5 generations there now? 5 generations. Donald and his wife Hannah run it now. Before that, Mikey Joe and his wife Peggy. Before that, Dan Joe Enright, I can remember back that, and Hannah, his wife, and I can't go back any farther than that. Nick Dan. Right, that's a long time to be in the one premises, and it's going strong, thanks be to God. And you'll never know, we might call in for a drink there if we're late. You'll never know. That's what we're doing, yeah. Sure, there's the next one to do, yeah. Right, we're here in front of Shine's. It's now Cameron's house, but it was where Jim Shine and his wife lived, Mad Shine. We used to pronounce her not M-A-D-G-E, but M-A-D. She was a very lively woman, and was always stopping us playing football on the road and various things, but we shouldn't have been doing anyway. But that Shine's, and it's now Cameron's. And as I go up here, there was a number of stores up there, and up to Mike Kennelly's there as well. Various people had various premises there over the years. Seamus, would you like to talk about those? Yeah. Tommy the Boss, Tom and Larry Enright lived, yeah? Yeah. That's right, yeah. Tommy the Boss was a great singer as well. He had loads of local songs. Yeah, and Lara actually had the first gramophone in Myvan, in Newtown Sands. And the night that Dainty Man, the Greyhound, which we'll talk about further up the road, won the Derby in Clonmel, 1929, 1930, Lara brought out his gramophone here, and they had a great hole around the square playing to 78 records. Yeah. So, opposite us here is now Mary Lynch's house, her husband Mike and herself. Before that, the Noonans were there. Joe Noonan, who was from Phoenix originally, he came to the parish to teach in Kilbaha School, which closed in 1969, to amalgamate up here with the Mother School and Kilbaha School. And before, it was originally owned by not originally, it was owned by the Sheehans. Noonan never owned that house. He leased it from the Sheehans. Tom Sheehan, the councillor, and Willie Sheehan and those people. And it was a police barracks as well during the RIC times, the RIC barracks. And I don't know if I don't think that was. There was a police barracks burned here, but there was one down where the old barracks is now as well, the closed down one. I think that's the one that was burned during the Troubles, but I'm not sure. But one of the two barracks was burned in the village anyway. Okay. Teresa, yeah. And Mary, yeah. Teresa. Who was that house there now where Buckley's was? No, but further up.
Jim Clackers.
Who lives there now?
Nobody.
No one. Paddy, what was his name that lived there? Paddy Bunce, was it?
No, that was the next one. Penny Buckley's.
Penny Buckley, yeah, Penny Buckley.
Well, between Tammines and that's
Yeah, right. Right, we're in front of Shine's shop here, which was a very, very, very popular shop for all the youngsters in the village, because they had the first ice cream fridge in the village, and we all came up to buy penny ice creams and twopenny ice creams, and you would get a twopenny ice cream that size between two wafers. But it was run by Lizzie Shine, and then by her daughter Bridie Shine, and her husband Jack Shine. Jack would have been from Kilbaha, and he worked in the creamery as well, which we'll talk about later on. But that shop, there were two shops in my time in the Dinn Road. This one, and two doors up, Maggie's. Maggie Dunford, she was herself. Margaret O'Flaherty, Maggie O'Flaherty married to Jim Flaherty, and she ran a very popular shop as well. Now these two shops did very well because the Marion Hall was opposite there, and when the shows would be on in the Marion Hall, and especially during Lent, and we were supposed not to be eating sweets during Lent, but for some reason we always got a dispensation, and we go to Maggie's or we go to Bridie's, and two very popular shops. And in the middle was Michael Scanlon, known better as Mickey the Smith. He lived there and with his wife, and she was a Moyvane woman. I won't say May, but I won't say. Can I say Grode? Okay, May Grode, May Moyvane, and one of the famous people that came out, one of the most famous people from Myvan came out of there, Con Scanlon, who was big in trade unionism, and I believe his son is now equally powerful in the trade union movement. So then that's Ita there, living there, Ita O'Connor and her husband Timmy Buckley. That was owned by his father Timmy the tailor, another tailor in the village. As I said, we had Mike Dorr, Mike the tailor, and Timmy the tailor. So there was a lot of industry taken before my time. I've heard stories, but I haven't been verified. A lot of industry, you know, Coopers. I know there was a carpenter up there, the Roaches, but there was a lot of other industries taking place in this road as well. So I'd have to research that from somebody, but geez, then they're all dead now, I suppose. But anyway, here we have Mike Kennelly's. That was the site. On that site was a house belonging to the Carneys. Mick Carney would have been the boiler man in the creamery in Myvan, lighting the fires in the morning to drive the power. And his wife was Catherine, and she was a Mulvihill, isn't that right? Catherine Mulvihill. She was from Kilbaha. And their son Joe would have been the last one of them that I remember coming back to the village to see us every year from his exile. And then, pardon? Yeah, Connie. Right, I don't remember Connie. Then you have, as Seamus said, you had Tommy the Bosses, Lars, and then up there Manahers. Now, everybody would remember Eileen Manahar, famous actress, with the plain players of Myvan, who won the All-Ireland on a couple of occasions in Athlone, and Eileen got Best Actress on at least 2 occasions in Athlone at the All-Ireland. Father Tom Hickey was the man who organised the group. Now, he came to Myvan from Brusna, and when he was in Brusna, he organised a group of actors there and actresses there who also won the All-Ireland. He came to Myvan and he won the All-Ireland. I'll tell you how good he was. He did a play one time by Lady Gregory called Spreading the News. a one-act play in English, and he got it translated into Irish as Dót Bran Lum, and he got the same players, Eileen Manaher and Morris Conlon, Liam Hanrahan and Bill Horton and my neighbour out there, Dennis Hanrahan, all those people, to learn the parts in Irish, and they won it in the Oireachtas the following year. And I asked Eileen Manaher, how did you learn that Irish off by heart? Because really she didn't have any much Irish. She said when she was going to sleep, she'd put a tape of her lines on, and she would learn them as she was going off to sleep. So that's a way of learning Irish now that we haven't tried yet in school. But anyway, Eileen married, of course, Mikey Joe Cronin, and their daughter Anya is very involved in drama and very involved in the GAA. I think she's the secretary of the GAA club here. She's also involved in the Development Association. But Eileen's mother lived there. She was a Ballylongford woman, and her father Mickey. And Mickey actually worked on the church when it was being built down there in the 1950s. And there was a famous character of the Manahers known as Jack Manaher, who was a very, very famous wit. We had a number of wits in the parish at that time. You had Jack Manaher in Myvan, and in Knockanure you had the Drury brothers. You had Paddy Drury, and you had Rock Drury, Mike Drury. So that's the Manaher's house. Above that, the Marion Hall. We'll move up.
He was a shoemaker.
Huh? Well, Mickey Manaher was a shoemaker. I forgot to say that, yeah. We're here at the Marion Hall. That's the refurbished Marion Hall. When I grew up, it was called the Marion Hall, M-A-R-I-A-N. Now, I think that means it was built in 1954, because 1954 was the Marion year. And any girl you meet that's spelled M-A-R-I-A-N, she's 1954. Otherwise, they're M-A-R-I-O-N or M-A-R-I-A-N-N-E. So that Marion Hall, may not have been the original one, but the one before that was built in 1954. And it had a very simple stage, no footlights, no sound system. Plays took part there. Card games, very famous card games, 41 and whist used to be played there quite a bit. Not played very much around here anymore. But loads of concerts. Then when it was done up, there are meeting rooms there, and the doctor used to come there, maybe still comes for all I know, and there were treatment rooms there, and it's a great asset to the parish. And we have bingo there every Thursday night, and you can just see the people doing. Now across the road, we can't possibly not leave Tommy Roach out of it. Tommy Roach used to, the creamery in Moyvane was built, started the Newtown Sands Co-op in 1895, and in 1959 they started a milk bottling plant. Paddy Shukra was the manager there, and they had a number of people driving milk lorries. One was Tom Manaher from here, and his neighbour Tommy Roach. And when the milk bottling plant closed down, the two boys were given the option of continuing with the milk rounds. So they did, and they did very successfully. They worked very, very hard, but they did very successfully with the milk rounds. And Tommy actually also owns a chipper in Myvan, which is very, very successful as well, and is a great place to go for a dinner when you haven't got time to cook it yourself. So Connor's, Moore's, and the John de Clark, yeah. I need a and what? Oh, I will, yeah, I will. We're stopping here, yeah. What was the name of the man that used to come home? Tom Moore, wasn't it?
Tom, yeah.
He's dead now, isn't he?
Tom is dead. Jackie. Breeda's still around.
Breeda's still around. And Jackie is the man who wrote the song about Newtown Sands.
Jackie's still alive in Newtown.
Yeah. Right. Before we leave the hall, you can see a plaque there to Dainty Man, who won the first ever Irish coursing derby winner in 1930. It was the winter of 1929 going into 1930, and he was owned by Tom Connor. Now the house next door is Connor's house. He was known as Granny the Smith. They were blacksmiths, and he was trained by Willie Mulvihill, who would be one of the Waver Mulvihills below at the bottom of the town where I showed where Ger lives now. and the dog was reared in the forge, with the result that his eyesight wasn't 100%. And there's a famous song about Dainty Man, which I can sing but I won't sing now, which says, though running unsighted behind the great hare, not once for one moment were we in despair. The dog was unsighted because he didn't have great sight, but he won the Derby anyway. And Tom Conor would have been a blacksmith, not the richest man in the world, and he was offered by a very wealthy English greyhound trainer a huge sum of money for Dainty Man when Dainty Man won the Derby. And Tom Conor famously said to him, he said, I've lived in poverty all my life, sir, but I'll keep my dog. So that was a very proud moment. Now, here we have Moores. You remember Tom Moore coming home? Is it Bridie her name is? Breda. Tom is the one that I used to remember coming home from America every year and drinking with him in Brostons. And Jackie Moore, still alive. You know that song that John Foley sings, "Oh Newtown Sands, oh Newtown Sands"? Jackie Moore wrote that. It's a lovely, lovely ballad, and you know, that's one of the reasons why I hate to forget Newtown Sands, because it's in so many songs and so many stories. So we can be Myvan and Newtown Sands depending where we are and when we are. Next door to it, John the Clerk. We all remember John the Clerk, John Collins. He was the man who ran the church for many years. He was there in the morning at 8 o'clock for 8:30 Mass, made sure that everything was ready for the priest, made sure the altar boys were all behaving themselves, and for many years he was a great character in the whole village, John the Clerk. And yeah, then next door to that, there was no alleyway in there into Ashgrove. There were a couple of houses. One of them was a mud house, the last mud house in the village, and the last people I think that lived there were the Buckleys. Winnie Buckley, yeah. And they were knocked in. That goes into where Colm Callahan's land was, and they built Ashgrove in there. So again, a new addition to the village, and very, very welcome. And we'll go a bit further then. The cup that Dainty Man won in 1930 was called the Sawtell Cup. It was a gold cup, gold-plated cup, and it was a one-off. Like it wasn't a perpetual trophy. So you won the cup and you kept it. So the family still have it. Tom Conor still has it from the Glen Road here. Lives down now the other road, but he still has that cup. And the Sawtell Cup is the template for the World Rugby Cup. The World Rugby Cup is an exact replica of that cup that we have in Myvan. Now, in these houses here, you had some very famous people. Noni Mahoney and her son Ned. You had the Doyles farther up. In our time, Noni's nephew would have been Vincent Smith. He would have come to live here in Myvan. He was from Coventry and he went to school with us all. And he took boxing lessons at one stage, and he was very, very handy, a very promising boxer, but he went back to England. Then his brother Barry came for a while, and Noni, she was an open house. Anybody could feel welcome to go into Noni's. And Doyles were next door, and Timmy the Tailor. Timmy the Tailor Buckley, yeah. Mickey finished there is right, yeah. Mickey, Buckley and Timmy. And Babe Ford was his wife, Babine. And yeah, and then Doyles.
Lived there one time.
That's right, yeah. Then you had Roaches. Well, we won't pass this house. This is Connell's. Mrs. O'Connell. Molly McMahon. This house is Thornhill. It was built originally as the principal teacher's residence for the school, which was just up there. The school that was built in 1888, where we all went to. It was originally the principal teacher's residence, and my uncle, Father Pat Cunningham, back in the 30s would have been there, and the principal teacher there at the time was Barry. and he had a fondness for some Guinness. And he used to send my uncle, he wasn't Father Pat that time at all, he was just Paddy Cunningham. He used to send him down to the pub to bring up a bottle of Guinness for him every now and again when he'd get thirsty. But and John, whatever, maybe, I don't know what he had. But anyway, then Tom Connell eventually got it. He was a principal teacher here in the boys' school. There was a boys' school and a girls' school, and he married Molly McMahon from Knockanure, Mrs. O'Connell, and she was principal of the girls' school. In my time, there were 3 teachers in the boys' school and 2 teachers in the girls' school, and there were the 1 yard, but there was an invisible line in the middle of the yard, and by God, if you passed that line, you would get into trouble, not because of anything to do with the girls, but because the teachers weren't talking to each other, which is not an unusual phenomenon. But anyway, one of the famous people that came out of there was Maurice O'Connell. Maurice O'Connell was the governor of the Central Bank of Ireland. He was very, very involved in all things financial, a great friend of John Bruton's, and would have been big in Fine Gael as well. Father Anthony Gaughan, the man who wrote that famous book, The Soul in Its Vicinity, he has his own publishing house in Dublin called Kingdom Press, and he published Maurice O'Connell's story, his autobiography. Maurice wrote his own story, and he published it last year. So one of the things I learned from that book, and among other things, was the last native Irish speaker in Myvan died in 1927. So it's quite close to us, just 100 years. 200 years. This is O'Connor's house. The O'Connors were blacksmiths up here. As I said, Granny the Smith, who owned Dainty Man in 1920s, was there. Then you had Tom Connor and Mossy. Mossy was the last blacksmith up here, but by that time, I suppose eventually horse showing was not so popular, but they got into the welding business as well, and they did quite well. And they were right next to the school. The school was up there at 2 sides of the school, girls on the right hand side, boys on the left, and next to it was the forge. And Tom Moore, would you like to tell us about hearing the sound of the... Go on.
Whatever the school and there, we had the sound of the anvil every day. Every day the sound of the anvil. Horses being shod, and many of the farmers that came in above them trying to clean in over the walkers. Standing there, we probably would be looking out the forge.
Yeah.
And the bellers, and you were on about the greyhound being right in the forge.
Yeah.
Sure, he had to be blind.
Yeah.
All day long, flame and smoke all day long.
Yeah. No, not fully blind. He saw enough to win the race.
He saw enough to win the race, but
It was probably the scent that kept him going, maybe.
So then...
You have Roaches. Mick Roach was a carpenter there. His wife was Ahern, isn't that right? Yeah. Nora Ahern. Was she related to Sean? First country Sean Ahern, and Father Pat Ahern of Seamus Atira. And Tommy now lives just down there where I showed you. Seamus is here with us. He's very important in the local development association. Without him there'd be nothing. Next door to that was Molly Moore, who would be a grandaunt of mine. She was McAvoy herself, Molly McAvoy, from over the road, and she was the caretaker of the school. So she opened the door in the morning, she put on the fire for the school teacher to on their backside to it and keep the heat from the pupils. And she was, yeah. And she cleaned the school as well. Next door to that is Scanlon's. May Scanlon lived there. She was Mickey the Smith's wife, and Con was reared there for a lot of his time, and the other brothers as well. Above that was Count Bonds. I know nothing about the Count Bonds except they were Scanlons, and that house has been derelict since the 1950s. I can't remember ever anybody living there. Huh? Was it a shop?
There's a small shop there.
Right. Maggie Cowan, yeah.
She's a Whitehead, that's for Maggie Cowan.
Yeah, right.
Count Bond,
yeah, the Count Bonds, yeah. And then as you go up, we won't go any further, I don't think. You had the school, you had the forge, and inside there you had the Mulvihills, the Connie Joe Mulvihills, Mary's people, and the footballers, the famous. The last time we had a Division 1 team in the County League was when the 5 Mulvihill brothers were playing for Myvan. And for money Myvan they called it that time, and that didn't go down well. And then up beyond that you had Cormac O'Leary's house. Cormac was principal teacher in the school here. The school closed in 1975. It was amalgamated with Knockanure and Kilbaha in 1969, and Cormac came down from being principal of Knockanure School to be principal of Moyvane School, taking over from Tom Callaghan, who would have been the father of Mario Callaghan and Mrs. Adams in later years. And above that then you had Callaghan's house, you had Collins' house where Bishop Jimmy Collins and Father Paddy Collins came out of, and then you had Tom Callaghan's house and Babe Deneen, his wife. They were up there, and I think we've gone far enough here. No. You know, I'll tell you that story there. That house was lived in by May O'Callaghan, who was a sister of Tom O'Callaghan. And her...
Was she an auntie?
Ina McCarthy was an orphan. There was Tommy McCarthy, there was Tony McCarthy, there was Ina McCarthy, and Auntie May reared Ina. So that's how Ina was there. It was never McCarthy's. Yeah, did she? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Cormac was Rathmore. Yeah. You have to cycle, yeah, from Rathmore, yeah. Yeah, we'll go down to the main street again. Right across there, next door to Enright's, where you see Main Street on Prieshride, that used to be Shine. It's now Stacks, who owned the butchers. It used to be Shine's, Old Con Shine, and his wife, the nurse Shine, lived there. And it's been reconstructed slightly. There was a huge shop window there, and for years on it was a Raddy bicycle. We all remember that. But that's where Con and Nush Shine retired to. And then next door you have Stack's Butchers. It was originally a much smaller premises. Ned Stack was a butcher there. His son Eddie took over the trade, and now his son Noel tries the trade. And originally they did their own killing at the back. No, originally they were up there, from up there, I'll show you later on. They did their own killing, and then they did their own killing there until the E laws forbade all that, and they had to get them whatever. But that Stack's there, and it's been there for 3 generations now, and doing very well. Again, it's something that brings people into the village, and we're delighted. Pardon? 24, yeah. Now, next door to that is Mike Sullivan's. Tommy O'Sullivan, his father, owned it. He was in England for years, and it was rented by Mick O'Dwyer and his wife, Mrs. Dwyer, never known as anything but Mrs. Dwyer. Mick O'Dwyer was a policeman in the village here. I can remember 3 policemen in the village that time. In my time, there was a sergeant and 2 guards. Sergeant Sheehy, Mick Dwyer, who never summoned anybody, and Jack Acton, who would summon his mother. So anyway, the Dwyers lived there, and Mrs. Dwyer was a great card player. 41, and next opposite there was Mac's Pub, which is where herself and Mrs. O'Connell and Eileen Mac, Father Dennis Buckley when he was at home, they'd all be playing cards, and they were playing at the time for 5p a game. Can you imagine that? Old pence, yeah. Next door to that is Sullivan's. It's now Flaherty's. It was in my time it was owned by Mikey Sullivan, who would have been the father of Ellie Mae Flaherty, who married Mikey Joe Flaherty, sister of Tom, a brother of Tom's down in Mutter. Great singer, one of our troupe of singers in Morades for years. And John lives there now. Actually, Ellie Mae was a great character, and she had a full view of the village. She's right in the centre of the village, and she had a full view of everybody who was passing up and down. And about 20 years ago, her daughter came home from America. Mary came home from America, and she saw somebody passing, and she said, "Ma'am, who's that passing the window?" And Ellie Mae said, "The days pass when you would know who's passing your window in my van." So many strangers. So anyway, the O'Mahony's were there as well. Before the O'Sullivans, it must have been, because Thomas O'Mahony won an All-Ireland medal with Kerry in the 1920s, and he came from that house, as far as I know, because when he came home from America, he used to holiday there. And the O'Mahony's were good footballers, and as I say, you know, emigrated, a lot of them. And we stay where we are. Just to the right there is Max. Now, that used to have a lovely lettering, McKelligot over it in plaster, but when it was taken over by Super Value, whatever it was, they had to put a plastic sign up there, which was a pity. But anyway, that's it. Max had a pub grocery. Denny Mac and his wife Eileen Leahy, Father Mike Leahy's and Father Jim Leahy's sister, Jack Leahy's sister, Father Dr. Tom Leahy's sister, Julia, married to Julia Mac. They're all interconnected. They ran a very successful pub there, and they ran a very successful grocery business there, and they had a few acres of land out at the end of the village as well. So much so that they would sell their fresh milk every evening. We'd go down with our gallons to get a couple of pints of milk from the Max. And that kind of milk was very healthy because it wasn't pasteurised. Now, you have to have pasteurised milk nowadays. But the result that we all got minor doses of TB. We didn't know that. But when you got the BCG or whatever it was, if you got a rash, that meant you didn't have to be inoculated against TB because you had already put it over you. So we got that from the milk. So, I don't know. Max also was a great place to get a pound of ham at closing time, because if you would shot a loaf of bread or ham for the morning for the breakfast, you could go into Denny Mac or Eileen Mac at 11:30 at 12 o'clock at night, and you would be served. But Denny then, when he was closing the bar, he had a phrase, "Love of the Lord, have you any homes to go to?" That's what he used to say. He wouldn't say it his closing time, "Love of the Lord, have you any homes to go to?" Right, opposite there now, we have O'Brusna Coins. That's the old Irish lettering. You have an O father, a B, an R, an O, an S, an N, an A C with a dot on top of it. That would be a H nowadays, an A father, an I, and an N. That's the old lettering of O'Brusna Coin, and I'm delighted they've kept it because it's unique in North Kerry now, that kind of lettering over the premises. As you know, it was a great pub run by Con and his wife, by Eileen afterwards, and by Brenda. For generations upon generations, the most famous football pub in North Kerry, because not only did Con win 6 All-Ireland medals, his son Jim won a few All-Ireland medals, his son Michael won a few All-Ireland medals, and Jerry actually won a North Kerry medal with Myvan. So that, and I think Mike played football, but I don't think that he won anything. Didn't have a great team, but that was an iconic pub. That's not where it originally was. It was up there in the gap between Carney's and Liam Hanrahan's. That was the original Brosnan's pub, and that was burned to the ground by the Black and Tans in the 1920s during the war, because Con was a very well-known Republican, and he had taken part in a number of ambushes. He was one of the people who shot the D.I. Sullivan in Listowel at point blank range on the orders of the IRA, and it cleared in his mind forever afterwards, by the way. But the Tans burned the pub to the ground and the shop to the ground, and the Brosnans built it there. Con and his wife ran the pub. His wife was Welsh. Was she Catty Welsh? Catty, yeah. And she ran the pub very much herself for a finish, but they also had a drapery business there. And when Con was buried, when he died in 1975, it was Paddy Mulvihill, Paddy Conishan and Willie the Waver that dug the grave. And Jerry went down with them for the dinner when they were digging it with a bottle of porter or something, and he said, "Boys," he said, "while you're finished digging the grave, call up to the corner house and Eileen will take care of you." So they went up anyway, and Willie was asked what he wanted. He said he wanted a double brandy. And Paddy Conishan was asked, "What do you want?" And he said, "Measure me for a suit." Needless to say, he didn't get it. Now, next door to that, we can still see it, is Carney's Bar. Carney's Bar was run up to COVID. It hasn't been open since COVID. By Mairead Carney, married to Tony Welch, daughter of Dan Carney, who was married to Lizzie Barrett, wasn't it? Lizzie Barrett from Glen, of Barrett's Bar in Glen, the real McCoy. And before that, his father, Miles Carney, ran it. And it was a very popular bar. And I remember actually in 1923, I just get the guy, the Free State troops were drinking in Carney's Bar, and they were coming onto their crossy tender or whatever, and a shot went off accidentally from one of the Free State soldiers and killed, in March 1923, killed a Private Cornelius Hayes in what would have been the Bowway now, as we would have called it. Because Miles Carney is my author for that story. He remembers it happening. So that's as far as we can see here. So we'll go around the Listowel Road now, and then we'll come back up and we'll finish. Now, you'll have to give me a hand here now. Right, this part of the village, there was a famous teacher, a Miss Shine, who taught in the 1920s in Myvan and 30s, and she had a house there. Annie Dunford bought her house, I think. That was Shine's house, wasn't it? And she lived there, and now Bobby Stack and his family lived there, Marie and all of them. And there was a dispensary there in the time when we had a dispensary. There was a bank there for a while, the EIB. The credit union had it there for a while, did they? Did the credit union operate from there at one stage? No? No. Marion Hall. But before the Marion Hall, Eddie Cunningham's house is where they operated from, it was. And now Bobby and the family live there very happily. And that's BD Agripart. What does BD stand for? Bobby and Dan, lovely. BD Agripart, again one of the industries in the village that brings in an awful lot of footfall into the village. Without them, we'd be finished. Because really the pubs don't bring in very many anymore. There are 3 pubs closed in the village now and 2 left. And drinking since COVID has really declined. And it's the BDs and the Mike Kennedys and the Node Stacks and the Harrys that bring in the footfall into the village by day now. Otherwise there would be nobody in the village by day. So at the back of us here, this is still Brosnan's. There was an orchard in there at one stage, which, just like the Priest orchard, was occasionally known to have been rocked by the Buddock destroyer, the Budderine destroyer. And we'll let this man pass. Down here where BD Agripart was Michael Mulvihill's place. What was his nickname? Mikey Nick, and Ellie, his wife. His wife had a problem with her legs. She was not very mobile, and she used to walk between 2 brushes. And she would call us to go across to the shop for cocoa and various things for her when we'd be passing. The shop was opposite her there, which was owned by Michael Nerine. Michael Mulvihill. He was married to a woman from Connemara, and they had 3 girls. They had Anne and Mary and Una. Anne Mulvihill is the mother of Conor Cox, the Roscommon footballer. That's where his mother came from. And they ran a shop there, but Michael had very little health and he died quite young. So that's that. We'll move on another bit. Right, this house has had many occupants. It has been, I can remember Mick O'Brien living there. He was the last man that lived there, he and his wife. Is he still there? Before that, it was owned by O'Connell's. They had a shop there. Before that, I know that Mick Maloney, you know John Maloney, the footballer, who died recently, and James Maloney, their father Mick, and his wife, they lived there. That's as far back as I can go. Can anyone else go any further? Huh? They had a boutique there, yeah.
I don't know if they ever owned it though,
I wouldn't think so, no.
And they were related to Kitty Shineable.
Right, we'll have to talk about Kitty when we go back up. Okay, this house here is McKelliget's, built by the McKelliget. It wasn't originally the site of a house at all. It was the site of a garage. Not a commercial garage, but to park a car and whatever, sidecar or whatever. And when Eileen was retired from the pub up there, Eileen Mack, Denny was there by that stage, she renovated the place and she built a house there, and her grandson lives there now, the O'Sullivans. Anne Mack was married to Mike Sullivan, and their son is now the principal teacher in Knockandure, newly appointed. So we go down this way. Oh yes, here. I have been trying to find out what is called the Russian house. Has anybody an idea?
A lot of people never noticed the Russian building. We used to talk about the Russian building at meetings, and some people outside the village never heard of it.
Yeah. It is known as it was built as a kind of a shed, wasn't it, for calves and stuff like that, was it?
We just noticed the Russian building.
Yeah.
But people outside the village don't.
Yeah, I remember it growing up. It was in a state of half-finished building for many years, and then they finished it up and put on this marvellous mural. I think that was Tony O'Connor. It is Tony O'Connor put on the mural. Yeah. Right. Right, this house is Brossen's now, isn't it? Mike lived there for a while with his wife Brady before they built the house down farther down. The first time I remember people in there was Molly Buckley. She was the wife of Master Buckley, who taught in the school here, and they had a farm down where my cousin Mossy Carney now farms. His father and my aunt, his father was Miles Carney, a brother of the Carneys in the pub, and my aunt was Noni Cunningham, and they bought the farm way back and from the Buckleys, and they came back up here, and Molly retired here. Mick Stack was there for a while, and you know Mick Stack of the Martin and Stole, he and his wife Lil Danaher, they had it for a while. And next door is Jerry Brossen's house, known as, it's still called Padua, home of St. Anthony, great devotion to St. Anthony. As far as I know, that was built as a retirement home for Dr. Michael, is that right?
Uncle Michael, yeah, my grandfather was born in 1900.
Yeah.
So, and he was in very early. When you think of all that went on, I think people forget that the history from him was, and he lost his mother and father.
That's right.
When he was very young, and they lost 3 sisters to GB, so they actually had no family. When you think of where they kind of come from,
Yeah.
kind of put it in perspective. So Michael was sent to Rockwell. They had the Welsh of Openborough began.
That's right, yeah.
And came in and educated him in national school, and then he went to Rockwell, and then he had to go in a Seuss name to play for Ireland, play rugby, and went under a Seuss name, and then he went to college, and then he went to London, and he sent home money then, and he sent home money at the time. So that was built in the mid-1950s.
Could have been, yeah, I remember it, yeah.
And when you actually look at that, and when you look at the house, and you actually look at a lot of medical houses throughout the country, it's actually in very similar design.
Right.
And in actual fact, it's really funny because Jim went to Dingle.
Yeah.
The house he bought in Dingle is the same. And
My
you
God.
look at a lot of areas when you go around and look at them, it was just done on that design.
Yeah.
And it was built by the people from the Stole. Hands. Yeah, and I can honestly say from living there, honest God, the insulation of that house is amazing.
Right.
Considering it was built that long, and there is very little heating on upstairs.
Right.
And there is very little dampness in the house, and it has held really well. It's really the building, has stood the test of time. Really.
Great stuff.
Renowned builder under the hands.
Yeah. The Brossens actually have a connection with Rockwell because Jim went there as well and Michael went there, and they both played rugby, and of course they were both Gaelic footballers as well, but they were able to get around it on account of being school students. But there's a famous story apropos of just rugby and Gaelic games. The famous Mick Mackey of Limerick, now we're talking about Limerick being a great team again. When they had a great team previously, Mick Mackey was the main man. And Mick Mackey was going to be suspended because he was a big rugby fan. How did they know he was a rugby fan? Because there was a vigilance committee that went into all the matches, infiltrated the crowd, spotted all the GAA people and reported them. So nobody wanted to sack Mick Mackey or to suspend him because he was so invaluable to the Limerick team. So they came up with a great solution. They put him on the vigilance committee. He could go to all the matches.
How much you say soup? Was that word you used for the
Pseudo.
Pseudonym. Sorry.
And Michael had to do that, and he was in Dublin and everything, and if you go back, that's actually old, he was,
Yeah,
I read
yeah.
a book called The Doctor's Sword, and at the time doctors couldn't get really that many jobs in Ireland.
Really?
You know, because the man, there was a name McCarthy that was the doctor, who was the doctor, the book The Doctor's Sword is about. And, you know, there was no chance of really getting work in Ireland that
Right.
much. And he was in Castletown Bear, but he used to go to Dublin. But it was an amazing story altogether. But again, I always found parallels with Uncle Michael's story, because he was on the HMS Newcastle when he was back.
Yeah.
He was in World War, is that World War One or two? World War Two, yeah.
Two, yeah.
His head is grazed when you actually look at him. He
Right.
escaped a bullet, yeah. He came home to die here then.
That's right, yeah.
And
He used to read the Irish Times.
he was
There were only 2 Irish Times coming into Max at the time. Father or Michael Brosnan and mine. That was it.
came from the Stole races and the All Ireland every year, and that was their party really. It was a massive time to come.
But why is it called Padua? Like, I presume that's...
Devotion to Saint Anthony.
But there was another brother called
Anthony, yeah.
It was built for Anthony, was it, or was it?
Well, it was family anyway.
Yeah.
The money for it basically.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. Right, this little plot was dedicated in 2016 on the centenary of the Easter Rising in Dublin, and we have the provisional government, the proclamation of the Republic, which was read outside the GPO on Easter Sunday, 1916 by Padraig Pearse, and behind it we have a little capsule buried, kind of a waterproof and earthproof and every kind of proof vessel that held various artefacts from the people in the village, and we're all down there, and it won't be opened until 2066, so whoever will be around for that, they'll see it. But it was Father Kevin's idea, and it was a lovely idea, and it's there now for all time. Next door, the school where I spent 32 years. Opened in 1975 when the school up the Din Road was closed in July of 1975, and it was a modern school built to modern design, and like all modern designs, not worth looking at. Because from that end of the school to that end of the school, there's no corridor. If it's raining, you have to walk through the room or out in the yard. That took some planning. In my time when I joined it, there were 5 teachers. Cormac O'Leary and Ina, his wife, Mrs. Adams and Mary O'Callaghan, her sister, and myself. It went to 8 teachers briefly. At one stage when Rita Groark joined the staff, the sergeant's wife or daughter, and then it went down to 3 teachers. At that stage, Knockanure was a bigger school than Myvan. Who would have thought that? But it was. But now, as I say, numbers are picking up again, and this year I think there are 17 people joining again. So the cycle of hemorrhage from the school has been stemmed at long last. The foundation stone of the school, that's quite new. That wasn't there in my time. I retired 15 years ago. That was put up since then, and it's a lovely piece, addition to the school. And we have the preschool there, run by a cousin of mine, Maureen's daughter. And would you believe I don't know who the principal teacher of the school is now? I've just gone. I believe in leaving things behind me when I leave. The police barracks was where the sergeant and his family lived. On that side, the housing quarters, and the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, was where the business of the police work was carried out. And it was there long before my time. It was also the site of a police and RIC barracks, and it was burned. It was vacated by the RIC. That was the story. It was vacated, and when the RIC went out, all the youngsters from the village, no doubt prompted by the IRA, had a holy in the place first of all, and then they burned it to the ground. And then it was built as a barrack, and at one stage, as I said, there were three policemen here, Gerard, and now no policeman, and it's closed down, and it's a pity because, you know, it's a fine old building, and please God, you would never know. Next door, we'll just move down to the church. Oh, yeah. Here we are, a couple of plaques here. This again is erected to the memory of Thomas Moore, the man we spoke about below at the Anamai Bridge. The 25th of the 5th, 1779 to the 25th of the 2nd, 1852, the National Poet of Ireland. We told you all that stuff. Then over here, we have the Myvan Tidy Towns 2001 Best New Entry Award in its group, Fair Jews. And this one here is the Philip Cunningham, a very interesting character. Philip Cunningham was born in Downlee. Downlee is, you know where that is, and where is, will you tell me?
Oh yeah, it is behind.
No, it's Myvan. Yeah.
Do you know where our old house was?
Yeah.
It is kind of
behind that. Yeah. Yeah. He was born in Downlee, and he was a bit of a rebel. And he joined the 1798 Rising, and he was a leader of the Rising in Clonmel. And for that, he was transported to Australia with the other convicts, and he organised the convicts there. And there was a rising in Parramatta in Australia in 1804. The Irish convicts and the other convicts rose against the British Army in Australia, and they were put down brutally. And there's two stories about him. One say he was hanged, one say he was shot under a flag of truce. We don't know, we'll never know what the true story is. But there's a monument to them, to that rising in Parramatta, which is outside Sydney, and that's Philip Cunningham. Right. A site that will be familiar to you all, where we say our prayers at various certain occasions and on certain set occasions in the month of May and therein. It's the grotto that was erected on this plot of loose land, basically. There was nothing there, and the local Development Association got the permission of Kitty Power Healy, who was one of the powers from Auckland, where my Uncle Joe, if you remember, had his house. That was Power's house, and Kitty dedicated the site. And Billy Quirk was the stonemason from Abbeyfield. He did the stone, and they got that donated, I think, by the church in Myvan. I think there's a Myvan statue, and he put it up there. But here beside it is a seat in memory of Michael Hanrahan and Dennis Hanrahan. You remember, they were brutally murdered some time ago, very tragically, in their own house. And it's a place to sit and remember Michael and his son. They'll be Shane's brother and father. So I'm not mercy on them. And then the church. A Boyd Barrett church. Never meant to be painted on the outside, but it is now. Dedicated on August 25th, 1956. The opening ceremony, for want of a better word, was given by Monsignor Kissan of Lizelton, who was one of the Kissans of Myvan originally. And they're the same people, and he was the head of Maynooth University and seminary at the time. Built by designed by Boyd Barrett of Cork, who would be the same Boyd Barrett as the TD. And Max Sweeney was the builder, and very big church. Many people feel it's too tall. Can I say on the record that I was a member of the parish building committee here at one stage when we were talking about the astronomical cost of having it painted and sealed and all the rest. And Father Lucid, who was very interested in building and knew a lot about building, said the best thing to do with that thing is knock it, he said. We didn't anyway, and we did it up, and it's there for a long time. There's a photograph inside in the church, if you'll remember, as you go in, of the crowds that were there the morning that the church was dedicated. Huge crowds, and we recognise still, some of us who are of a certain age, we recognise the faces in the crowd. And there's a couple of interesting things inside in it. The altar and the Cedilia and the place where they read, what do you call that, the ambo. They were designed by a very famous artist called Imogen Stewart. Now, Imogen Stewart is the one who designed the statue of the Pope for Maynooth and places like that. Is world famous. The cross in Knockanure Church is hers as well. They cut the cross in Knockanure. They shouldn't have. The cross in Knockanure, originally in the church in Knockanure, was on a staff that rose up from the ground, signifying Christ rising from the cross. And in their wisdom, the people decided to cut the cross and bolt it onto the wall with shed bolts, which is a mortal sin as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, if you could do anything about it, Father, please do. No, I'm not yet. Yeah, we'll talk about that then, yeah. So inside there, there's an altar, and there are 4 figures on the altar. And when I used to be taking the kids, I always took the kids in a couple of times a year when I was taking them to show them the church and all the rest. And the kids used to think that the 4 figures on the altar were Noah's Ark, but they're actually the 4 evangelists: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And the Cedilia is the tree of life, as is the ambo. And you notice that there's an arch at the bottom of each of them, and the reason that arch is there is to model the arch inside in the church. The church is arch shaped inside, and Imogen Stewart has replicated that in her stuff. It was commissioned by Father Michael O'Leary, and it was carved by John and Teresa Murphy from Tralee, and it's one of our great pieces of art, and to be treasured. And I'm glad we have it in Myvan, because, as I say, it got bad press in discovering Kerry. But anyway, the other piece down there was put up by Father Joseph Nolan. It's a piece from the Bible. And the one on the left is the altar stone talking about, in Latin, about the foundation stone talking about Boyd Barrett and Max Sweeney and those who laid the stone. Sorry, Ursula.
Did you say who was here in this house originally? I can't remember.
Paddy Broderick. I will not. Paddy Broderick lived in that house originally. Then Sonny Finnell had it for a while, and I don't know who has it now.
She's based in England, but she comes home quite regularly now.
Right.
Her parents originally were from Ballylongford, and her mum and dad are
Right. These 2 houses here. Willie Dore is probably one of the most famous people in Myvan. Dan Keane had a very famous poem about him called Willie's Car. Willie had this notion, he was a diddly-dee, you'd say maybe, but he used to drive around the village in a car, beep, 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 and he used to do messages for the post office, delivering telegrams for ITA, and he'd be taking telegrams all over the parish. But anyway, one day he decided it wasn't worth his while. He wasn't getting enough money for delivering the telegrams. So he collected the telegram from Ita. He went up as far as the Creamy, and he came back. And I said, "You didn't go deliver that telegram at all." He said the car wouldn't go in the gate. But that was Willie Dore anyway. He lived there on his own. His real name was William O'Connor. And his mother was Mag Dore. And his father was Johnny Anthony O'Connor. And it's safe to say it now at the remove of 120 years, but he was known as Johnny Anthony because he famously robbed the statue of money of St. Anthony in the church at one stage. So that's it. Next door to that was Paddy Scanlon and Hannah Flaherty. Paddy was a great worker. He worked for years at Prendeville's farm. You know Mrs. Prendeville who taught here, her father's farm. He worked there for years and he retired to here. His wife was the woman who really ran the church here. She opened the church in the morning, she cleaned it, she was a confidant of the parish priest always, a great woman, and ran a great show. Next door to that was a house that was built by Lil Keane, Dan Keane's sister. She was a priest housekeeper and she wanted to retire there, but she died before she lived in the house. So Brendan and myself bought the house first of all before we moved out to Auckland. And basically we knew we were getting 2 children. As you know, they're both adopted children, so the house wouldn't have been big enough for all the books and the 2 children and the music and all the rest, so we had to build a bigger house. Next door to that is the garage. That was started by Dan Callahan and run by himself there, and Mike Dore worked there for a while as well. He finished on the other one, and once upon a time in this village you had 3 filling stations. You can't buy petrol in this village now, you know, and only 1 garage where you had 3 garages. And that's as far down as we'll go. We'll go up the main street now, I think, and we'll finish it. We'll go as far as Horton's Forge, I think. Yeah, okay. We won't go around that far, but Seamus has properly pointed out we should talk about the sports field. And while we're talking about the sports field, we'll talk about the woodland walk as well, which is a tremendous asset to the village and to people who come in for a half an hour walk. It takes me half an hour to walk from there down to the edge of the wood, down by the Knockanew Road and over towards the Tinnell, the Limekill, which is a lovely, lovely walk. And then below that you have Conroston Park, the football field, originally owned by the Broston family and was acquired by the GAA, who ran a carnival here back in the 1960s and 70s to put up what was the stand, and now the bigger stand and the various facilities that's there now. It's a state-of-the-art place now. I remember when we started out, you know, back in the 50s going to matches, the footballers tugged out beside the ditch and left their clothes, and if a fella had a watch, and not too many people had watches that time, they'd say to the young fellas, "Will you mind my watch?" So the Conroston field opened officially in 1975, was it? No, it was later. He died in 75. The first match was played there between Kerry and Laois, I think it was, and there was a hurling match there as well, Kerry and Cork, I think. But there's an official programme which I still have that was brought out specially for it. Okay, we'll go up to the main street. Well, next to Mac's shop there, they also had provisions. Eddie Flaherty and Jack Scanlon from Tarbert used to sell pollard and grain and various feedstuffs there as well. Next door, Kitty Shines. Kitty and Willie, her brother, they ran a lovely shop there. Willie had a farm and a couple of good fields, like, and Kitty ran a lovely sweet shop there, and it was a very. I remember as a young fella, I used to go in there because she used to make lovely brown bread. And I'd go in and she'd give me a lump of brown bread, spread thickly with butter and coated with sugar. Very good for you, isn't it? Yeah, the centre of the village now ripped asunder. Look, 1 house gone, 2 houses gone, 3 houses gone, 4 houses gone. Centre of the village. Next door there, probably none of you will remember it, but I was told by Billy Cunningham, my uncle, that was a butcher shop owned by a man called Patsy Sheehan. And Patsy Sheehan, I don't know, the Rossins would know this from the famous photograph, and you would know it as well, Mary, of the team with Con Ross as captain. Patsy Sheehan is the white-haired man at the back there, the butcher. And he's mentioned in the song, "'Twas early that morning I went down the street, I called into Pat Sheehan, he was chopping up meat. Pat says, will you tell me how we to get in? Oh my God, we'll get a drive in the lorry from Ben." That was Ben Cunningham, my uncle, yeah. So that was Shines, and that's next to it Patsy Sheehan's. Next door to that is now Colm Callahan's. Before that, it was Donny Mulva lived there with Eileen Brosnan, his wife. Before that, the Guineys lived there. The Guineys had a bakery there. Ned Guiney from Ballybun and his wife, he was McGrath. It had originally been McGrath's. They lived there. Ned Guiney married in, and he ran a bakery business from there. And the bakery business folded, I suppose, with O'Neill's coming in and People's Bakery Rathkeil coming in and various other people back in the 60s. The Guineys left about 1968, I'd say, in and about there. 65. I went to before that. I went to secondary school in 65. About 62 or 63, I'd say they were gone. And as a matter of fact, the first television set in the village was here in this pub. It came in 1962. But the television set was into Myvan in 62 because I remember it because Kerry won the All-Ireland in 1962, and Paddy Shukra, the creamery manager, took a rake of us in his car across to Ballyhahal to see it, to pay sixpence into the hall to see the All-Ireland television. So there was no television in Myvan up till after 62. Right, that's Colm Callahan's now, the veterinary shop, and next door to that was Ellie O'Mahony. Ellie Mahoney and Jimmy, her brother Jimmy O'Mahony, better known as Jimmy and Putt. It was the last thatched house in the village, and it's now Colm Callahan's as well. But when I was christened Gabriel, I was the first Gabriel in this village, and nobody could make hog, dog or devil out of the name, and I wish to God they'd called me after my father. It was Jack or my uncle Dick or something, but anyway, I've had to live with that bloody name all my life. But Jimmy and Putt was asked inside Dan Carney's pub, what did my mother call her son? I don't know, says Jimmy, was it Abraham or something? I know. Anyway, next door to that, Barney Enright's, where you see the little plaque on the wall. Barney ran that shop there. Before that, his father and mother ran that shop. He was Paddy Enright, and she was a Ahern. She'd be an aunt to Sean Ahern's, and Father Pat Ahern. And he was a very fine poet. He wrote most of the songs we've been quoting, he and Mary and myself, were written by Paddy Enright. Very memorable songs. That time, whenever a football team or a greyhound won something big, there was a song made in commemoration of it. So next time my van wins something big, we'll have to do something about that. The woman who lives there now is from England. She's Barbara Derbyshire, and she's a poet, quite a good poet, and she's a couple of books published. Yeah. Now, we'll just move up a bit. Right, we're here in front of the All-Star Bar. We've just passed what we used to call the Bowway. Don't ask me why it was called that or what it means, but there was no wall there when we were growing up. It was just open territory where we all played marbles and played cowboys and Indians and all the rest. It was a wonderful place. It's where Brosnan's bar was that was burned. Below that, Moraid Carney's, I didn't mention that, I don't think. Moraid's was a bar that was owned by herself, by her father Dan and his wife. Before that, by Dan's father again, Miles Carney. It goes back to at least four generations, and it was where the buses used to stop in the old days when we had a bus service before the new bus service came on. I think the bus still stops there now. And Moray is where the Boghole Boys came out of. The Boghole Boys are not all boys. They're a generic term for men and women who could sing or dance or play or tell lies or tell stories or drink or whatever, but that's where they all went. And the lovely thing about Moray's was she had no clock. We won't say any more about that now, but you know. Anyway, Liam Hanrahan had this bar. He just closed it recently. Liam, primary teacher, wound up as principal teacher in Killicrane, outside Listowel, bought the bar from Bernie O'Callaghan, the great footballer, brother of Cullum's there, and Mrs. Adams and Mary O'Callaghan, who taught in the school. His father was a principal teacher in Myvan National School. Bernie had it for a while. Before that, I think, was Connie Shine had it. And Connie Shine's aunt had the bar before him. She was Mary Shine. And she had the bar and she ran it very successfully. Connie didn't run it very successfully. He wasn't the best businessman in the world. But before that, it had been owned by the Richardsons. The Richardsons were a very, very, very wealthy family. They owned all that stretch there. They had a huge business, and they went bust, basically, and they went to Chicago. They had a creamery as well. They went to Chicago, and they paid back every penny of what they owed to the people they owed the money over the years. So much so that they could come to visit Myvan in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. I remember when Ida Keating coming back to Myvan, they used to stay in Ballybunion, but they used to come out to visit all the friends in Myvan. Also, Paddy Mulvihill owned a premises there, your Uncle Mary, married to Mary Welsh. There was a hall there as well. Welsh's had a dance hall there before Paddy moved in there. There was a big dance hall there at the back, and it was very, very popular when dancing was at the local crossroads, and you didn't have to go to Newcastle West or Abbeyfield or anywhere to get a dance. So there was a dance hall there as well. So then that's the Village Grill. Tommy Roach owns that. We spoke about that already, doing very well. Next door to that is now Brosnan's, Mike Brosnan and his wife and their family, Kathleen and the family. Before that there was Eddie Stack, the butcher, and his father before that, Ned Stack and his wife Mary Ellen. They lived there, and they did their own killing of the animals at the back there. I remember that quite well. Then next to that there was no house that's built in, that there was a kind of a yard owned by Barney Enright, and there was a right of way back there into Barney Enright's fields. Liam Hanrahan has a house back there now, so the right of way is closed. And then here, these three houses, 1, 2, 3 houses, they were owned by Paddy Enright, as I said, the shop, and it wasn't all one house. There was a yard at this side of it and a house there. It was owned by my uncle Billy Cunningham and his wife Jo Connor. The last person to live there was the famous Eddie Cunningham, a very famous character. And my grandfather lived there with his wife. She was Forden, Mary Ann Forden, and he farmed. He had a bad heart. I'll just tell a brief story. He had a very bad heart, and he died when my mother was 6 years of age of a heart attack, going out to Auckland for his cows. So the family stayed together, and the oldest brother, Bain, that's the man we'll get a driving lorry from Bain in the song, he had a lorry and he made a lot of money doing haulage around the place. So he held the family together with my grandmother. And one evening, when my mother was 9 years of age, my grandmother was mixing gasoline from one container to another in front of an open fire when it exploded on her and burned her to death. So my mother was an orphan at 9 years of age. So the family stayed together, and one of them married quite well below in Glen, Mrs. Dalton, May, the eldest one of them, and she kept the family together. And there were 2 priests in America who educated the whole damn lot of us, basically. So we have a lot to be grateful for. But that was Cunningham's. There was a house there and a big yard there at the back, and Jim Sheehan bought the whole lot there some years ago. Now, next door to that was Margaret Welch's. There was mass for her niece last Sunday, isn't that right? Yeah, Mary, yeah. She ran a business there with her brother Dan, that neither of them married, and they sold papers there, the newspapers. They sold paint there, they sold hardware there, they sold groceries there. It was a great shop, Margaret Welch's. And next door to it was Maggie Culhan, Mary was the sister, Bridie Culhan. Mrs. Madden lives there now, but that was a shop there as well in our time. Bridie Culhan ran a very, very successful grocery shop. Because, can I tell you, Noreen McAvoy can remember 32 businesses, she says. I can remember 14 shops in the village when I was growing up. But the other business I didn't count, I suppose, being a shopkeeper's son. Right, we'll move on. We won't go as far, we'll just go as far as the Ballycross, and we'll call it a night of that, okay? Here we have Speedy's Bar and Lounge. Very popular. One of 2 bars left in the village, where there were 5 at one stage. It wasn't always there. It was built by Joe Carney, Mairead's brother, who owned Mairead's farther down the village. And he ran a very successful business there as well. And he sold to Speedy Nolan, Liam Nolan, and still running as a bar. No, it wasn't always such. There were 3 houses there. One was belonging to Jimmy Nolan. Jimmy Nolan was a local correspondent for the newspaper, the Kerryman newspaper. He wrote the Myvan notes, and then he wrote the Myvan and Knockanure notes, and then Knockanure wrote their own notes, and Myvan wrote their own notes. Jimmy had a camera as well, and he took very iconic photographs of this village. Some of them have been made into postcards, but he took weddings, he took confirmations, he took first communions, he took families, all this kind of stuff. And when he died, he was a bachelor. When he died, the photographs, some of them are in the store in the possession of Vincent Carmody, but most of them just went lost, which was a pity, because it would be an invaluable archive to have. Below Jimmy Nolan's, he had an ice cream fridge as well. He had the second ice cream fridge in the village. Huh?
He had the first 20 ice.
He had, yeah. And below him was Tom Culhan. Tom Culhan was a harness maker, a cobbler, or a harness maker, and he had a speech impediment. But he ran a very successful business there for many years. And below that was Mrs. Quinn, Mamie Quinn. She would have been Windle herself from, would that be Denelappa or Ockram over there? Ockram. And she was a seamstress, and she did a very good business there. Very polite woman, very holy woman. Her husband Stephen is famous in one of the football ballads by Paddy Enright. 'Twas in it Listowel I met Stephen Quinn. Says Stephen to me, they are certain to win, for they're jolly young fellas. Of them we are proud. Let you finish up your drinks till I stand to the crowd. That was Stephen Quinn, so he must have been a good man to drink. Right, we're not going to go any further. We'll just look up here. At the creamery. Newtown Sands Co-op, established in 1895. The last manager of the Newtown Sands Co-op was Michael Liston. Before him was, many years before him, was Paddy Shuckrow, and he replaced a man called Michael Barrett, who would have been the father of Dr. Brendan Barrett, who was a doctor in Dill for many years. He died. His wife was a teacher in the school here in Myvan, and later on in Tarbert. So the creamery has now been taken over by North Cork, and they have their own business there as well, their own hardware and whatever. And it's a pity, I suppose, that the creamery had to go, but times move on and times change and whatever, so less said about that, maybe the better. By the way, just beyond it, and the same building there, in 1959 to 61, they opened a milk bottling plant. They were the first milk bottling plant around here, and they sold their milk all over Kerry and Limerick, and it was Tommy Roach and Tom Manaher that drove the milk lorries. Gale Valley, and the bottles are still there. You can't beat our butter, but you can whip our cream. You can whip our cream. You can't beat our butter, but you can whip our cream. Yeah. Beyond, on the right hand side of that, that's where I grew up. That's my father's and mother's place. And at the very end, where that car is going out there now, where that red iron roof place is, that's another forge. It was owned by the O'Grady family. They were great Republicans, and Mary O'Grady married Paddy Horden from Faddenfore, and he carried on the trade there, and his son Billy carried on the trade there as well. Billy was one of the great actors in the village at that stage, and this place is still called Uncarta, which means the forge. And just a story about those, the O'Gradys, they were great Republicans, and they both fought in the IRA in 1919 to 21. But then when the treaty came, they split. Con Brosnan and Danny O'Grady and Jack Ahern went on the Free State side, and Tom O'Grady, Danny's brother, went on the Republican side. And Tom O'Grady was sentenced to death for being a Republican in possession of a gun. And Danny O'Grady and Con Brosnan got him off. And Danny O'Grady never spoke to his brother. Tom O'Grady never spoke to his brother because he owed him his life. They both went to the Bronx. They both lived, however big the Bronx is, but it can't be that big, close enough to each other. They never met. They came home separately every summer. Very tragic, but that was it. That was the bitterness of the Civil War. So listen, thank you very much for sticking by the whole walk. Thank you very much. I hope we got something out of it. And thanks very much to Conor. And Tom. Yeah.
He went from
It did, yeah. Yeah.
271. Your donkeys and calves.
You had. You had. And a Volkswagen.
The people that had their drinks after the crib.
They did.
And I often wondered one thing. They came out footless, you know.
Yeah.
The donkey, the horse, everyone took them to their destination.
They did.
And how did they come back? They leaped back against the tank and they came out footless and they pulled out their reins. But the horse and the donkey, there was one thing they could never do, was open the gate. They brought him all the way along. They know every turn, right, left, they couldn't open the gate for him.
There you are. I do well, oh God, I do well.
His horse stood below there for
Yeah.
the hind leg lifted,
Yeah.
waiting for his owner to come up and take him home.
I have a poem there I came across, Contentment in Newtown Sands. And the whole lot, all the people...
That's Dr. Brendan Barrett, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and all the...
Will I read it?
Kind of course.
This is by Brendan Barrett.
I photocopied it before I came up.
Manager Barrett's son. He was a doctor in Glyn. It's about Newtown Sands. You got to think again, Newtown Sands. When I grew up in Newtown Sands and went to Mutter School, we had a turf fire in the room, real smoky as a rule. In those days in Newtown Sands, like every Newtown boy, I liked to spend my leisure time beside the Onamai. In those times, the village, my favourite time of all, was watching cowboy movies in our parochial hall. It was thanks to Patsy Horton that I loved the comic strips. Gene Autry was my hero, Roy Rogers and Tom Mix. When I was just a little boy, I loved the Creamery Mill, Tom Mangan and Jack Coney, and kind Mick Mulvihill. The butter maker was Miss Mac. That's right, she married Connie Shine afterwards in Connie Bill. For many and many years, Mick Candy ran the boiler room and was an engineer. The church then was our theatre, and we had a leading man, the scourge of all the sinners. His name was Father Dan. Con Shine used to eat in bicycles, so shrewd a businessman, with the Humber and the Rally on the instalment plan. A hero was Con Brosnan, a footballer supreme. Of his All-Ireland medals the young lads used to dream. Tom Stack was Willie Stevens' son, who heard the distant drum and made himself quite famous at Aintree on red rum. And when the war was over, the ice cream was a treat, on sale at Jimmy Nolan's in his shop on our main street. And when I dwelt on serious things and thought of man and God, I wanted most in my life as free as Jack Abroad. He lived out there. I'll talk about him in a minute. During those years in Newtown Sands, I never really thought that all our fun was priceless and never could be bought. When I grew up in Newtown Sands, the sky seemed blue all day. We had tea and barnbrack and lots of time for play. Dr. Brendan Barrett. Jack Abroad lived out there.
Thanks.
Jack Abroad lived out, he was Hanrahan. And the reason he was called Jack Abroad was there was another Jack of Hanrahan living inside him. So there was one Jack Abroad and the other one Jack inside. Fact. So thank you very much. You've been very good and I hope you got something out of it, and thanks so very much to all of you. God bless. Thanks very much.
I have written new verses for 95 score on hurling and football and fashions galore, of camogie and racing and sporting as well, from the far famed Clonana to lovely Clonmel. Sure, I'm finished with hurling, with football and tugs. Now it's plain to be seen that I'm gone to the dogs. For I now take my pen with an unusual speed, but to write of the dog of the Rattleway breed. At Clonmel at the Derby we saw 64. Some of Ireland's best puppies in action once more. They all came determined to bear home that cup, though some that we saw fit were hairy old pups. While the fancy ones faded right out of our sight, the Kerryman star shone exceedingly bright, and of 63 there were none fit to lead that little red dog of the Rattleware breed. When his name was called out, Dainty Man cocked his ear, and as fit as a fiddle we saw him appear. He walked into slips as if he owned that park. How he wagged his big tail at the slightest remark. 'Twas no nickname at all, for the dogs all forlorn, for the chances of victory to pieces were torn. Take him home, Granny shouted, and give him a feed. He's no match for my dog of the Rattleware breed. 3 cheers for Tom Conor to give now we must, that his hammer and anvil may never show rust, and that we in the future around Newtown sands see more cunning Brosnans and more dainty mans. Now the cradle of coursing is Fame Valley Duff, and in Tommy O's kennels you'll find the right stuff. He's a sportsman 1,000 times over indeed. It was famous for years in the O'Sullivan breed, and our hearts with emotion were ready to bleed when the Derby was won by the Rattleware breed.